talk about environmentalism, global warming here for a moment. Here's the latest bad news from our environmental activists. It turns out that these compact fluorescent bulbs that they want everybody to buy, in fact, this is President Bush and the Republicans did this. They banned incandescent bulbs. As of January 1, the 75-watt incandescent bulbs illegal in America. Last year, it was the 100-watters. In 2014, they're going after the 60-watters and the 40-watters. They want us all to buy compact fluorescent bulbs. But now here's a new study that says that these eco-friendly CFLs, this is from Long Island Stony Brook University, the light bulbs give off extraordinary levels of UV radiation, which can burn skin and even cause cancer. But don't worry about it. The world will be saved. You and your children may die of cancer, but the world will be saved so you can sleep calmly tonight. I want to welcome to our decision maker line a frequent guest here on Focal Point, Dr. Cal Beisner. He is the national spokesman for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Cal, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you, Brian. And I have to say I'm at least partly safe from those CFLs because UV radiation also encourages the growth of cataracts. But I had my cataracts removed last month in both eyes, so I'm safe at least in that respect.
You are smarter than the average bear, Cal. So anyway, it's just and to me this is a Republican deal, Cal. I mean, this was President Bush, and when the Republicans were in charge of everything, that's when this ban went into effect back.
Foolishness is nonpartisan, isn't it, Brian?
It absolutely is. Well, speaking of foolishness, I want to talk with you about the hockey stick, and you've seen, by the way, that Al Gore sold a current TV to Al Jazeera.
Yes.
And he pocketed $100 million, and from an and Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar. This is oil money.
Yes, right. Yeah, Al is in the pay of big oil.
Oh, got $100 million from big oil. Oh, geez. All right, now let's talk about this hockey stick thing. Now, those that saw the Al Gore movie, Inconvenient Truth, I forced myself to sit through that thing, Cal. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
Over and over for me.
Oh, yeah. You no rest for the weary. But tell us about the hockey stick that was in Al Gore's movie, and then I want you to transition from that into the real hockey stick, the hockey stick that actually matters and is good news for the poor.
Yes. Good news for modern man, as a matter of fact. Well, the hockey stick in Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, purported to graph global average temperature over the last roughly 1,000 years. And it was called hockey stick because it looked like a hockey stick lying on the floor with its blade pointed up at the end. It seemed to show very stable global average temperature for nearly 1,000 years, and then all of a sudden, at the very end, basically from the mid-20th century onward, it shot upward, and that supposedly proved that we were experiencing historically unprecedented, man-made, dangerous global warming. Now, it turned out.
Well, now, Cal, if I remember, am I wrong about this? Didn't he have one of those high-rise cherry picker things?
Yes.
And
Gore went up in a cherry picker to show where that line would reach.
Like it went clear off the screen and up above the curtain and heading toward the ceiling, and he had to get in this high-rise thing to show us where this hockey stick was going.
Great theatrics. Unfortunately, it had nothing to do with good science. It turned out that hockey stick graph had been based on very, very carefully cherry-picked data. You didn't need a cherry picker to lift Al Gore, but the scientist who put it together cherry-picked his data, relied on tree ring circles from just a handful of trees from several locations, carefully picked because they gave the shape that he wanted. But besides that, he also used a computer program, a statistical program called principal components analysis, a particular type that is guaranteed to give you a hockey stick shape no matter what numbers you pour into it, because it will mine the data, select the numbers that will result in the hockey stick, and reject the rest of them. So that eventually got exposed as the real fraud that it was. And Even the UN IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which featured that hockey stick graph, I believe, 7 different places in their 2001 assessment report, just simply quietly pretended it never existed when it came to their 2007 report.
Now, as I understand it, Cal, what this hockey stick was supposed to show was the correlation between rising CO2 concentrations and rising global temperatures.
Yeah, it was basically designed to try to show that. And, of course, what has actually turned out is that there is no statistically significant correlation between CO2 concentration and rising temperatures on any sort of a short scale. What we have discovered is that instead, temperature rises first, and CO2 concentration follows it. So the cart is before the horse.
And Cal,
bandwagon.
That's very, very important to understand. I want you to repeat that for our listeners, because the myth out there that environmentalists are advancing is that a rise in global temperatures is a result of an increase in CO2. You're saying it's the other way around.
Yeah, and both on the very long term, in terms of ice core data, we're able to show that if you accept the conventional geology of millions of years of Earth history, on those long-term ice core data, what we find is that global carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere follows atmospheric temperature changes by about a 600 to 1,000 year lag. Now, what we've also just recently discovered by some new studies is that even in the short term, the CO2 concentrations are following temperature instead of leading it. Now, if CO2 was causing the temperature changes, CO2 would, of course, have to come before temperature. So the whole thing is just exactly backward from what Al Gore claims and exactly backward from what the IPCC and all the climate alarmists have claimed.
Now, explain to us just briefly why a rise in temperature would be followed by an increase in CO2 concentration.
Oh, very simply because that rise in temperature in the atmosphere very, very slowly brings about a rise in temperature in the oceans as well. And CO2 is dissolved in seawater, but as the temperature of seawater rises, the amount of CO2 that is dissolved in it decreases. That is, some of it is released into the atmosphere. Same principle for why if you open a really cold can of soda, you get some fizz out of it, but not terribly much. You heat that can up, and you open it, and you get a whole lot more fizz because the CO2 comes out of the liquid much more rapidly. So oceans, because they're made of water instead of air, have a lot more mass, so it takes a lot longer for them to warm or to cool than it does for the air to do that. But when you warm the air, little by little you warm the oceans, and that releases CO2 from the oceans. So that's why the time relationship is what it is.
Now, I want to talk about there's a piece here on the Cornwall Alliance by one of your policy analysts, Douglas Gregory, and that's what I wanted to talk about. He's got a CO2 graph that does show, frankly, a hockey stick configuration, CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere that start spiking in connection with the Industrial Revolution as more CO2 is emitted from fossil fuels. Yeah. But it turns out, according to your research analyst, this is actually good news for humanity.
Absolutely. And this is not something that just Cornwall Alliance has recognized. This has been understood by economists and energy specialists for well over a century. CO2 is emitted when we burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. And the more fossil fuels you burn, the more CO2 you're going to emit. That means that CO2 is a measure of how much energy you're using. Well, energy, in turn, is a basic component of economic production. We use it to produce everything that we use: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, education, medical care. I mean, anything that you imagine that is of any value to human beings, we use energy to produce it. So how much energy is getting used is a good measure of human material well-being. The more energy that's being used, the better off people are going to be. So what the data show us is that there is an almost perfect correlation among gross domestic product per capita. That's a basic measure of material well-being, wealth, prosperity, right? Life expectancy, and carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. Those just go together absolutely perfectly, and because life expectancy, because increasing life expectancy leads to having more people in the world, since after all people live longer, so more kids can be born before they die off. It also means that population grows right along with the increased use of energy. So what we have is a graph in which we see for hundreds of years, indeed thousands of years, basically practically level human population, practically level human standard of living. Everybody was just absurdly poor, had essentially just barely enough food to stay alive and one change of clothes and a little hut to live in, and that was about it for the vast majority of humanity through all human history, and very, very little energy use. And then suddenly, with the Industrial Revolution, all four of those lines, GDP per capita, life expectancy, energy use, and carbon dioxide emissions, all curve upward in what is basically a hockey stick shape. This is good news, because what it shows is that by using that energy, we have improved human life. People live now nearly 3 times as long as they did before the Industrial Revolution. And there are more than 5 times as many people as there were at the time of the Industrial Revolution. And they live at a standard of living that is actually, for developed countries, about 190 times the standard of living of our ancestors before the Industrial Revolution.
Our guest has been Dr. Cal Beisner, National Spokesman for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, telling us, surprisingly, from what you've heard from every other media source, that rising CO2 concentrations, a good sign, a great sign for humanity. Cal, thanks for being with us. God bless you, my friend.
Brian, thanks. God bless you, too. Hope people will come to cornwallalliance.org and sign up for our newsletter and learn more of this.
Back in 2.